Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here to do a recommendation video for books to read if you love Star Wars. Now, for those of you watching this video, I hope that you will stick around even if you aren't a Star Wars junkie, because these are just good, plain books. And this video would be a little bit too obvious if I just told you that if you love the Star Wars movies, you should also, well, then just read the Star Wars books, which is a very fair thing to say, but I wanted to make the video more interesting than that. So what I want to do is recommend books that are not movie tie-ins or part of the expanded universe of Star Wars, but instead books that are unrelated to Star Wars, but for one reason or another reminded me of the plot, the characters, or some kind of vibe that I just felt was reminiscent of Star Wars. So if you love the universe, if you love the characters, if you just love sci fantasy or other science fiction stories, then definitely stick around. It's going to be a combination of both fantasy and sci-fi in this video. And all that being said, let's get started. Alright, so if you're going to talk about Star Wars read-alikes, we have to talk first about Dune by Frank Herbert, which you can tell just from reading this book was clearly a huge inspiration for George Lucas in writing the original Star Wars trilogy. And so within this book, I definitely see a lot of tie-ins. In the book, we follow Paul, who is going to the Sand Planet, where his family is taking control. There is a plot against his family, and things go from there. And this is a book that is a good example of sci fantasy. So while it takes place on another planet, it definitely has those fantastical elements to it. Just like Star Wars, a lot of people argue whether or not Star Wars is fantasy or science fiction, and we'll go over that as we go through this video. But in terms of the setting of the story, the planet here definitely feels similar to Tatooine with the sandy place. You have a lot of the sand beasts, which again feel very reminiscent of what you see throughout the films. And you have a main character, Paul in this case, who in a lot of ways kind of reminded me of Luke, someone who's very innocent at the beginning. And it's very much a coming of age narrative, a potential chosen one. And the book is full of action. Of course, it's the first in the series. And I just think that if you love a lot of the setting, the themes around Star Wars, then I think you'll enjoy this as well. Also really thought that the bad guys in this one, the villains, they felt perhaps a little bit cartoony, but they actually reminded me a lot of like Darth Vader. And you have these evil men standing around or sitting around these like tables and discussing their evil plans. And it just felt like a scene that you would watch in a Star Wars movies where the villains would be talking about their plans for the Death Star. And so I do think that if you love Star Wars, it's great to see this, which again was written before the films and clearly was some inspiration for them. So if you're looking for that, I think that this one will definitely steer you in the right direction. Next up, let's talk about The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and this is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. In this book, we follow a few different characters. Primarily, we follow a young girl named Vin, who discovers that she has some abilities in this magic system where there is the ability to push and pull and manipulate different metals and ingest them in order to have different abilities. She gets trained by this rebel named Kelsier, and the story goes from there. The larger framing of the story is the reason that I want to recommend it in this video, because this book was set up with the premise of what if a book is written after the bad guy has already won, which essentially is the setup for the Star Wars trilogy, or the originals I should say, because of course in that Vader has already risen to his place and we are following the rebels that are trying to take down the evil empire. And so very similar to this, the Final Empire, they're trying to bring down this evil lord that has been ruling over their land for a very long time. So I really like that aspect of the book that I think well mirrors the first movies, where you have these rebels that are just again trying to take down and fight and scrap to save, in this case, the galaxy or their world. And I would particularly recommend this first book. I would say is the closest to the Star Wars universe. The later books go in a bit of a different direction, but I do think this first book definitely gave me Star Wars vibes from the very beginning, and I really pictured the evil lord in this book as Darth Vader, if I'm honest. So if you love a book that centers around an evil dark lord that is going to give you Sith or Vader vibes, then this is one I would definitely recommend. I thought it was a lot of fun and is very accessible in terms of getting into fantasy. So if you're more of a science fiction reader, this one is very easy to follow, with a very distinct, solid magic system where you get to learn the rules of how it works. So it felt very appealing to my brain, which tends to work in more of a scientific way where I want rules and guidelines and all of that, which you do get within this book. Next up, I want to talk about The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This is the first book in a series that is told over a few different points of view. The main story follows that of the daughter of the emperor who has lost their memory and they're trying to get it back. Within this world, there is a magic system that involves bone shards where they use the shards of the citizens in order to conduct this dark magic. But the reason that I want to recommend this book is for those of you that love the just lovable smuggler character in the vein of Han Solo. And so if you're looking for that within a book, there's another perspective of a smuggler within the story, Jarvis. And I just loved his perspective because while he's a smuggler, you find out that he's basically a softie. He ends up getting a companion and he goes along, ends up helping people along the way. And while he appears to be the tough guy at the beginning, you realize that he really does have a sweet side, just like Han Solo. So I strongly suspect that this character got some inspiration from the most iconic lovable smuggler, and I don't fault the book for that at all. I just think this one's really enjoyable. So if you're looking for some Han Solo love, this one might scratch that itch for you. Next, I want to talk about Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, and this is the only graphic novel I'll be including in this list. But if you are more of a movie fan, the graphic novel format might appeal to you because this is all done in full color illustrations, and of course it's going to be much more cinematic because you're not just having the action described to you but actually getting to see it on the page. This is a story that is kind of set up as a Romeo and Juliet where you follow these two characters that are on opposite sides of a warring faction. They end up meeting and falling in love and then running away, having a child, and the story follows them as they're on the run from the warring factions. And so in terms of plot, it's a little bit different than the Star Wars setup, but it definitely gave me Star Wars vibes. It's set in a science fiction world, so there are different planets, there are different creatures and aliens, all of that, but it also has a fantasy feel to it because there is magic that exists and it just kind of has that fantastical feel. So I feel like it has a very similar vibe to Star Wars, and within the story you have a lot of really inappropriate things and just different aliens and creatures. And if you just love kind of the vastness of Star Wars, if you love those scenes when they're in the cantina and you get to see all the different beings that are there and all the weirdness that is happening, if you like the weirdness of Star Wars, this book takes that weirdness and just cranks it up to a 10. So I really enjoy the story. I think it has a lot of heart. It has like an epic love story in the middle of it, but arguably is perhaps a little bit stronger than that of Padme and Anakin because I think that these two are a stronger match and a better pairing. But I definitely think that there's a lot of comparisons that can be made, a lot of similar humor, and so I do think that if you're open to graphic novels, this is an excellent one to check out as a Star Wars comp. And I also want to talk about Winter's Orbit by Irvina Maxwell, and this is a science fiction story that is very heavy on the romance. It follows a prince who is set into an arranged marriage with another man, and within the story there's a bit of a mystery, but I'm going to be honest, this book is really heavy on the romance and it's more romantic than the books I normally am drawn to, but I did want to include it in this video for those of you that love the fan fiction surrounding Poe and Finn from the new Disney trilogy. And so if you were someone that really wanted them to get together in the films and was disappointed that they didn't, this book is kind of the answer to that. Again, this is not actually a media tie-in, but the characters are clearly very similar to them, and I definitely saw the connections to the original fan fiction, which I think is originally how this book came to be. I think that they wrote fan fiction and then they rewrote it so that it was its own entity and not underneath the license of Disney. But anyway, if you are looking for the romance of Star Wars, particularly the gay romance that never happened in the Disney films, this one might appeal to you. Again, heavy on the romance. I would have preferred a little bit more plot, but it definitely gave me Star Wars vibes. So if you're looking for that, if you want those aesthetics, this one might be up your alley. And I also want to talk about Ashes of the Sun by Jangla Wexler, which is the first book in an epic fantasy series that definitely feels inspired by Star Wars. So within this book, we follow two siblings that right at the beginning of the book, there is an event that basically causes them to be split. And so they go in different directions. And in doing so, one of them joins one warring faction and the other one joins a different one. And they become on opposite sides of this war. And within the story, we follow them as they grow and have to maneuver around. And this is a story that, when I say it's heavily inspired by Star Wars, I will let you know that there are fight scenes within this book where they basically fight with lightsabers. They do not call them lightsabers, but they are sticks that glow. and they definitely are lightsabers. So if you enjoy the Jedi aspect of Star Wars, which I of course do, I definitely think that this book will give you similar vibes. This book also has sibling themes in it, just like the movies, but I will say that the siblings here didn't really remind me of Luke and Leia. It's kind of Luke and Leia had been on opposite sides of the factions. Instead, in a lot of ways, it perhaps reminded me more of the division between Ben Solo and Anakin, and how they were friends and close, and how their relationship was torn apart by being on opposite sides of the factions. So again, if you're looking for something that is going to feel like Star Wars, have a similar plot to Star Wars, have characters that are going to go through similar character arcs, and you're looking for something that is all of those things but is not technically a Star Wars book, this is the direction I want to point you in. I think that you'll be very satisfied and get all the lightsaber battles you ever wanted. They're just not called lightsabers, but they're basically lightsabers. Let's be honest. Finally, I want to recommend a duology, and that is The Risen Empire, followed by The Killing of Worlds, both by Scott Westerfeld. And this is a set of science fiction novels that are set in a future or another world or galaxy where there are two warring factions. One are those that are following and worshiping this lich that has essentially found a way to keep himself alive as a undead ruler, and then we also follow another faction that worships technology and artificial intelligence, and they have very different ideologies, and so they are at war. The beginning events to the story involve them stealing the daughter of the lich and then having to go and try to rescue her. Now, I really think that this series will appeal to those of you that, like myself, adore the Sith, and particularly looking for something that is going to be reminiscent of Palpatine, because within these books, of course, you have that undead lich character who has found a way to extend their own life and stretch it just like Palpatine did. And this book, or this series rather, is just so atmospheric. It is dense, and you have some good Star Wars fighting. So you actually have scenes where they are going and again attacking the warring other side, and so it actually has like the Star Wars parts of Star Wars if you're looking for that. I think it's very technical, it's very science-based, so this one has less of the fantastical elements, despite the evil undead lich part. It feels much more hard in terms of the science, and I really enjoyed it. I do feel like it's underhyped, and I would love more people to check it out, so highly recommend. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? And I'd also love to hear if you've ever read a book that gave you Star Wars vibes even though it wasn't actually a Star Wars book. Also, tell me, what is your favorite Star Wars movie or TV show? Everyone has a different opinion, and I think it largely depends on what your entry point was into the franchise, because I think it depends a lot on age, which ones are the good films and which ones aren't. But if you're new to my channel and want to stick around, you can subscribe. I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and true crime. And if you want to help me out more, you can drop a comment, even if it's just a little emoji that represents Star Wars. If you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.